All right, you're on.
All right, it is Wednesday, March 15th at noon. And so let's start this Clackamas County Coordinating Committee I-205 tolling diversion meeting. So we've got a small group thus far and we all know each other, so we don't need to do any introductions there. But so our first order of business, this should be an interesting meeting because the draft EA has dropped, and I'm sure many of us have been busy reading and talking with our staffs about this public comment period. And so we have Mandy and Nicole here to give us a presentation. And unless Trent has anything he would like to add, I would like to hand it over to Mandy and Nicole for their presentation.
I recommend that as well, that ODOT take the lead here and reserve most of your discussion time for the remainder of the meeting.
Okay, great. And I think Adela is going to help us with the slides this afternoon. Thank you for having us back, and nice to see you all. I am just going to kick us off, and Nicole's going to go through the presentation today. We were asked to come and share what changed between the draft mitigation projects that we were talking with you all about a couple months ago and the versions that we have in the environmental assessment. And I think maybe before that, there's just a couple slides to highlight the comment period. Are those at the beginning, Adela?
They're at the end.
They're at the end. Okay, great. So at the end, I'll just kind of go through a recap of our plans for how to engage folks in the environmental assessment conversation. And we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers as we go.
Thanks, Mandy. I'll take it over from there. So yeah, as Mandy mentioned, kind of the key things we want to cover today are the mitigation projects that are proposed and included in the environmental assessment, and specifically highlighting what's changed since the last time you saw those graphics. And we discussed mitigation, which was in December. And then at the end, we will cover a few of the mitigation next steps, and then just the overall project timeline and ways to comment on the EA. So I'll start us off by just going through these intersection impact maps. So really just a reminder, set the baseline here again, that we studied 50 intersections within our area of potential impact. And we have 2 study years, so 2027 and 2045. And for each year, we are comparing the build to the no build in that future year. And so the area of potential impact, the study intersections, and the methodology for the transportation analysis were all identified and put together in coordination with the local agency staff. So this map shows the results from the intersection analysis for 2027. Most of the 50 intersections we studied do not have impact. So those you're seeing with the orange circle and the check mark. We did identify 14 intersections that would be impacted in 2027. So that means they would operate worse in 2027 with the project compared to without the project. And these 14 intersections are located in the 6 geographic areas where we've shown the mitigation maps before, and we'll cover those today too. So that's Oregon City, Gladstone, Lake Oswego, Tualatin, unincorporated Clackamas County, particularly around Stafford Road, and then Canby. And so then those 14 intersections are also included in 2 different categories on this map. So you've got the green circles with a check mark /X, and those are intersections that would not meet the mobility standards with the project, but they would without the project. And there are 5 of those in 2027. And then the blue circles with an X are intersections that would fail standards with or without the project, but they get a little bit worse with the project. So there are 9 of those, coming to 14 total. And we've proposed the mitigation strategies to address these impacts at those 14 intersections. And so that's largely what we'll cover today. Those details of the mitigations can also be found in the EA and then the interactive map if you've had a chance to explore that on the project website. Next, the same map for 2045. So this shows 7 additional intersections that would experience worse conditions with the project compared to without the project in 2045. So the symbology is the same, with the green circles indicating intersections that would meet standards with the no build, but do not with the build. And so there are 3 of those on this map. The blue circles then are intersections that would not meet standards with the build or the no build. And there are 4 that are different on this map compared to the 2027 map. You'd also see that there are 3 intersections that were included on the 2027 map that are no longer impacted in 2045. So that's just because of changes in traffic patterns over those years. Things shift around, and there are some impacts that no longer exist in 2045. So for those 7 intersections that are only impacted in 2045, we don't see 2027 impacts in those locations. That's where we're identifying monitoring and that framework that we have discussed with you all before, and will continue to discuss with you all as we establish a monitoring framework for those 2045 impacts. So now just to get into the proposed mitigations by area and really, again, highlighting what's changed since December. So I'm not going to walk through all the details on these graphics as I've done before. We're happy to take questions on them and can talk more about them. But I really just want to focus on kind of the high level, what's included, and then highlight those changes that have occurred since the last time. So in Oregon City, you'll see the intersection improvements, the transit bypass lane improvements, as well as some safety improvements. Again, not getting into the details of all of those things, but the things that have really changed since you saw this map before. We added the green, kind of light green box down at the bottom left that includes a summary of the benefits in the area. We have also added a note to the line converting to one-way for 15th Street. We added from Main Street to Oregon 99E to indicate that it's that's the only part of 15th that we're suggesting converting to a one-way. So just some additional clarity there. Under the Oregon 99E and 14th Street intersection improvements, we removed a note about adding a second southbound left turn lane to 14th. And we also removed the dual right turn lane from 14th onto 99E. So that's now just converting it back to its current 1 left turn lane, 1 right turn lane configuration. And these changes were made based on discussions we had with Oregon City staff. So that's the only changes that were made for this Oregon City. All the other intersection improvements and things noted on this graphic were the same as they had previously been. Okay, so in Gladstone, we are primarily noting safety improvements in Gladstone. There was one intersection, the 99E and Arlington intersection, where there's an existing STIP project that would improve the operations at that intersection. And so the toll project could accelerate the implementation of that. And then we've identified the proposed safety improvements along 99E. So again, those safety improvements here, as in same within other places where we're recommending safety improvements, they're things like the retroreflective sheeting on signal back plates, some trees to frame the driver's view and help with traffic calming, and mid-block crossings, as well as a raised median specifically in this area. So the changes to this map that were made since last time, again, adding the green box. So you'll see that consistently on all of the maps that is new. And then under the pedestrian and bike improvements, we added a protected pedestrian crossing to indicate a proposed mid-block protected pedestrian crossing.
And then Nicole, would you mind just, clarifying so everyone understands the percentages in there and what those are in comparison to?
Yeah, so the safety percentages and are based on standard factors for when you implement certain safety improvements, like the reflective sheeting on back plates or adding the trees. So the types of improvements, safety improvements that we're suggesting, there are there's a safety manual, an ODOT approved safety manual that identifies what percentage decrease in crashes could be realized from those types of improvements. So that's where those numbers are coming from. So if you didn't implement those things, you know, safety would stay the same. You do implement those things, you could, it's projected increase or projected reduction in crashes by the percentages that we've noted on the slide here. And then, and that's the same for all of these graphics where you see those percentage numbers in the safety section in that light green box. So for Lake Oswego, again, the improvement here is the signal, adaptive signal control and some pedestrian improvements along Oregon 43. The changes are, again, the green box and adding a pedestrian signal under the pedestrian improvement section to indicate a suggested signalized ped crossing at the southbound right turn lane to McVeigh Avenue. In West Lynn, just another reminder kind of on this one that the this operational impact in West Lynn is actually 2045, but we're proposing some of this near-term mitigation to address pedestrian and bicycle safety. So again, it's, you know, improved crosswalks and bike lanes. And we added the green box here on this one, and then removed a note about filling sidewalk gaps that we had on a previous, the previous iteration of these graphics, because this project is already in motion. So it's not something that we would be doing as part of mitigation. It's already happening. And then for the pedestrian improvements, we removed a note about raised crosswalks or speed bumps because in further discussion with West Lynn staff and also looking at West Lynn's transportation system plan, those are not the types of improvements that they like to see for traffic calming. So we removed those as potential improvements. In Tualatin, and this is an area where we're these Nyberg and ramp intersection impacts go away in 2045. So they're just a near-term 2027 impact, and it's also physically constrained in this area. So our mitigation is participation in the city's planned bike and pedestrian improvements and some safety improvements in this area. And the changes that were made on this graphic, once again, the green box, and then we had previously had transit signal priority identified on Southwest 65th, but due to feedback from the local agencies, the kind of cost benefit of this type of improvement in this location doesn't really bear out. So we removed that suggested mitigation. On Stafford and Borland, the mitigations are around impacts to Stafford Road, including adding roundabouts and or an all-way stop or a roundabout. And so that's really what changed here is we removed the safety improvements on Stafford because those are also already underway or being implemented by Clackamas County. So we added the note that you see indicating Clackamas County is doing those, but took them off of our proposed safety improvements. And then added a note, the notes about pending additional analysis for the roundabouts, just acknowledging that we need to complete a full justification for a roundabout before that is implemented. And so that was added to the Stafford and Mountain line, as well as the Borland and Eck, where that used to just be an always stop, and that potentially could be a roundabout as well. And then in Canby, the proposed mitigations, again, along 99E, and adding a signal at South End Road and some lane reconfiguration there, a roundabout at Haynes New Air Road, and then some improvements at 99E and Lone Elder to address the kind of approach and configuration of that intersection, as well as some safety improvements in this area. So the changes here since the last time are under the pedestrian improvement section. We added pending an engineering study, just noting again that we are, need to confirm that the improvement is needed and would not result in any other unintended consequences. And then under 99E Haynes New Air Road, we removed a bullet that added a southbound right turn lane on New Air Road, because that was a holdover from when we were proposing a signal at this location, but we're now proposing a roundabout, which would not need that additional right turn lane. And then quickly, just to go through the next steps for mitigation, just to cover this again. I know we've talked about this quite a bit, but we'll take the comments that we received from the environmental assessment public comment period. We'll evaluate those with the Federal Highway Administration, determine if additional analysis is needed, what that analysis might be, and then we would conduct that analysis and continue to work with local agency staff to determine what the appropriate mitigations are. And then once we come to a decision as to what those final mitigations are, that would be included in the revised environmental assessment and the NEPA decision document.
So how about if we pause there?
Yeah.
To provide opportunities for comments and questions on any of those slides or the mitigation process.
Do we have any questions or comments thus far? Mr. McCabe.
Okay, a couple issues that aren't listed that are already a problem and has become a problem since 2008. The Stafford exits, especially Stafford going the I-205 exit, and it's checked off in orange, so that's really not acceptable. But when people come off I-205 going north, they get off at Stafford to just continue on to the other side so they can get past lanes 2 and 3. Why at this time, and why not with this project, make that illegal for the people to cross over and put in some diversion device and a warning that if they exit, it's exit only. It's not exit and enter back onto I-205. This has been going on ever since the third lane was put on from I-5 to Stafford, and it has become a dangerous situation. And it's all to get past the traffics in lanes 2 and 3. I rarely see it for southbound, but I always see it for northbound. And there have been accidents there because of people doing this, because the people that are coming on Stafford Road, when they see that the light's gone red, they assume that nobody's going to continue across to continuing onto I-205. So they start taking the right-hand turn, assuming that that nobody would be doing it. And it's being done constantly. And there's constant accidents there. And it must be recorded some way by ODOT, and it's not being addressed. And as far as a lot of those things that are checked off in orange, they have become a huge issue since 2008 after those lanes were put in. And in addition to that, why is ODOT not paying for, I mean, Clackamas County's paying for what you're showing on Stafford Road. They're doing improvements because of problems that have occurred because of I-205 and all the diversion that's occurring. Why is ODOT not paying for it? Why are the residents of Clackamas County forced to pay for a problem that was brought by ODOT?
I appreciate your comments, Mr. McCabe, and I can just reiterate some of the information that Nicole provided in terms of the NEPA process. So the National Environmental Policy Act process guides our work for the environmental assessment. And our analysis looks at the planning years that Nicole mentioned, 2027 and 2045, and compares doing our project to not doing the project. And so we understand that there are a variety of conditions today that you might want addressed. The environmental analysis, again, looks at the project's impact on the future conditions. I'm happy to look into that intersection separately and let you know what I can find out about it. And I think you indicated that it was an orange circle on the mitigation map. So that would be one of the intersections we did evaluate if it's an orange circle. And we found that the project does not impact that location. Nicole, anything you want to add to that?
No, I would just say that, additional details on that. I mean, I can't pull up exactly in my mind right now what the details of that intersection are from the transportation technical report, but that's Appendix C to the EA that's available on the website. The transportation technical report video that's available on the website gets into some more details of those mitigation projects and the analysis as well. And then the transportation section in the EA provides a summary of all of those things. But I'm, like Mandy said too, happy to kind of look into the specifics of that intersection and what we found in the modeling for that intersection too.
Thank you, Councilor Baumgartner.
Thank you. Thank you for the information. Just as in part feedback, it would be helpful for me, and I don't know if anybody else too, maybe, to have, for instance, the first slides that we were shown with the symbols and the various failing and the status of various intersections. It was so magnified, or I mean, rather zoomed out, that the symbols were overlapping each other. And it would be really helpful if you could provide us with just a slightly bit more magnified. I understand the difficulty of fitting everything in the screen, in the one frame, but I'd like to see these intersections a little bit better. I haven't had a chance to study in depth the report, although I have it printed up. So it's probably in there and I will do that. But I mean, for the effectiveness of this particular call that we're on, it would help if we could in real time be given an example that's a little bit more useful. And then when at least the West Lynn section, when we went to that specific just now, all I saw addressed was 12th Street. So I guess I'm confused. Maybe there's going to be another section of this presentation that addresses other impacted intersections, but I didn't even see 12th Street being impacted that much on that first slide you showed us. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Baumgartner. We can definitely provide, a list if that would be helpful of the intersections. We provided that before and can get that to you and note like what sections of the environmental assessment. I'll also highlight, Nicole mentioned that we have an interactive map on our website. So you can click on the intersections that we've studied that are of most interest to you and get the details that way as well. So we'll pull together some information to send after this call. Nicole, could you talk a little bit about the impacts that we're seeing in West Lynn?
Before she does that, can I just say one thing just to address your response to my question? I do have a list and I know we've gotten it in the past, but I'm just saying it would help me the most if I could have the most useful information during the actual real time of this call. And I appreciate that you'll send it to me later, but I can't really interact as effectively if I don't have the information in the meeting actually. Thank
Okay,
you.
understood. And apologies that what we have isn't sufficient. We thought that the zoom in was the individual maps of those areas. So if we misjudged what would be most helpful, apologies there.
Yeah, so looking at West Lynn, there are not operational impacts in 2027 in the West Lynn area. So we're seeing some impacts in 2045. So that's why what you saw on the mitigation graphic, the more zoomed in, was around 12th Street, because we did see it was the one location where we saw potential pedestrian impact, where what we study for pedestrian impacts is pedestrian level of traffic stress. So how comfortable it is for pedestrians. It's the same evaluation for cyclists, how comfortable it is for them to be on a roadway. And so we noticed at that location, the project actually makes it a little less comfortable. And so we are proposing those pedestrian improvements along 12th Street to address that potential impact. Otherwise, the West Lynn intersections in the West Lynn, kind of Willamette Falls Drive area are that Willamette Falls Drive 12th Street, and then the I-205 ramps at 10th Street. Those are 2045 impacts. And so again, they would be part of that monitoring framework and plan that we've talked about.
Why are we still using 2045 when others are getting 2027? Why are we going back and forth?
So it's 2 different years. So we looked at impacts in 2027 and impacts in 2045. And so the 2027 analysis helped us determine more nearer term impacts, what's being intersections that are being impacted, nearer to today. And that's where when we saw,
I understand. I understand they're 2 different years. I'm just asking why we're not using 2027 numbers for, you just said it's for 10th Street, it was only 2045. Why aren't we using 2027?
Well, we analyzed all the intersections in both years, and NEPA requires us to do the long range planning and it requires us to look at 2045. And then we did additional analysis to understand the nearer term impacts in 2027 as well.
And so we did not see any near-term impacts in West Lynn in 2027. So that's why we don't have West Lynn noted as a 2027 impact, because we did not see any impacts in 2027 for those intersections in West Lynn.
And in this modeling, are you using the projected construction of the roundabouts that are going to be going in at the 10th Street, for instance, intersection with 10th Street and Willamette Falls Drive, and the dog bone roundabouts that are going in at 8th Street along that same corridor at the exits?
I would have to look into that to know for certain. I know that the traffic team, coordinated with West Lynn and other staff to incorporate projects that needed to be incorporated into the model. So that one, to be sure on that one in particular, I will have to get back to you. But
thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sherman.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Mandy, Nicole, always good to have you here. Appreciate the presentation and the information. So I guess from a definitional standpoint, I'm sorry, I'm only about 50 pages into the document, but they've been 50 really good pages. So I appreciate the hard work. So when we talk about like no project impacts, I'm assuming that there are kind of multiple things that are being taken into account. So like the volume, so volume or level of service is like a project impact. Obviously, there must be some threshold, like, because there's going to be an impact everywhere. But the question is, what triggers a project impact? So is it failure kind of based on those kind of letter designations that constitutes a project impact? Because also you talk about like safety. Safety is a little bit different measurement that, and I guess by definition, if we use like West Lynn as the example, by definition, to have a safety issue, there has to be an increase in volume. But of course, what you're saying is it's not going above that level of threshold to trigger that. Am I kind of on target with those?
Yeah, so we, as Nicole mentioned, before we started our analysis, we worked with our participating agencies and jurisdictional partners to develop the methodology that we'd use for the traffic analysis. And that includes how we would determine impacts. And so if Nicole has that handy, by the time it's her turn to talk, she can talk about the criteria that was used to determine if there was an impact. And there were operational criteria, and also we looked at different measurements for safety. And the operational standard is the jurisdictional standard for like that corridor intersection. So most jurisdictions, it's volume to capacity. I don't know if we had any that were level of service, Nicole, but we had criteria that would have applied to either. That was the basis of our analysis, is the project causing that intersection to fail based on the jurisdictional standard that was already set.
Yeah, and so I don't have some of these details right at my fingertips, but Mandy's right. It was volume to capacity ratio, and is the threshold. So if we saw in the future the build alternative performing worse than the no build alternative by a certain threshold, that was like 0.05, difference in changes in the volume to capacity ratio from the no build to the build, that was considered a project impact. And then where we saw places where the volume to capacity ratio was exceeded in the no build and the build, again, where we saw a difference though in the build that was slightly higher, we identified that as an impact too. So there were, they don't meet standards in both conditions, but they're a little bit worse in build. So we identified that as a project impact. So yeah, that, and then safety, just from a NEPA standpoint, safety, there's not a requirement to study safety per se, in the transportation analysis. So when we were looking at that, we really were working with Clackamas County and other agency staff to determine the best way to address safety impacts. So through some of those mitigation meetings we had a lot of conversations about safety impacts and how we measure those. And so that's where our safety analysis methodology came from, and why we really had a focus on some improvements that address safety specifically, not just operations too.
Okay, so because I think as I look at the document, what it's not measuring is it's not, or I shouldn't say, as I look at those two slides, the 2027, 2045 slide, what we're not measuring there is we're not saying, are these intersections failing or not in the future? We're measuring, is the project impacting them to a level of failure? So in theory, if we were looking at those future periods, we might have systemic failures that are occurring, but aren't specifically related to the project, correct? So this is really kind of just measuring the impact of the project, which I appreciate. That's the point of the exercise. So when we kind of look at 2027 versus 2045, was 27 used just because it's kind of the end of the construction phase, kind of the first year of full implementation at that point? And I guess the reason I ask that is because I know that in reading through a portion of the EA, it kind of refers to during the construction phase from late 24 to 27, where you've got the potential for highway volumes to decrease by, I think, if I'm quoting this correctly, it's like 20 to 30% in certain areas, which would be related to people being in the construction zone and paying a toll. But the increase in diversion only 5 to 10% on some of the measured intersections. And I'm just not sure how to wrap my head around that, because we're looking at a period of time where there could be really significant problems in diversion, even though the document kind of makes it seem like it's not as big a deal. And then of course, 27 being the first year where it's fully functional in its new iteration. Am I kind of on track with that interpretation? I guess I'm just kind of curious how to think through that.
Nicole, do you want to answer the part about the modeling year 2027?
Yeah, sure. So yes, we did choose the modeling year for 2027 as as kind of like a year of opening analysis year, and the point at which why we're really assessing mitigation for that near-term mitigation for 2027, so that we can determine, what the near-term impacts could be, and those near-term mitigation projects too.
The other parts of your question, Councilor Sherman, that I'll try to address are that when the modeling folks talk about diversion, they talk about a whole bunch of different kinds of trips that are adjusted. So that includes trips that don't get made, trips that change in terms of time of day, trips that change a route, trips that change a mode, trips that switch to carpool or something like that. So those, overall diverted trips could go a lot of places or not go. And then I will say, yeah, the assumption at this point is that there would be a toll that happens before construction is complete. And the commission will ultimately determine the toll rates during that period, as well as moving forward. For the environmental analysis, we, if anything, need to overestimate potential impacts and tell the full spectrum of those potential impacts as well as benefits. So there are a lot of assumptions that we've made in terms of the traffic analysis to hopefully be able to illuminate that full spectrum.
Okay, one last question, and I'll be done. I appreciate the time. Or maybe not a question, more of a comment, and I don't know how to, again, as a layperson, to think through it. I'm in the investment industry in my real job. And so when we measure variables, when we measure statistical modeling, we always try to measure a single variable at a time, adjusting a single variable, because as you adjust multiple variables, you can impact the outcome through that adjustment. And so in my mind, as I look at kind of the EA, I kind of think that we've got tolling as a variable that's being added or subtracted, and then the improvements as a variable. But I know that we're measuring both of those as a single thing, because I know that the improvements don't occur without the revenues. So you need to kind of have those together. But, and I know that it's a Herculean effort to try to do any of this modeling. So, in my P brain, when I say, boy, mathematically, the right way to model this is 3 models. It's, scenario 1, impact of tolling, scenario 2, impact of improvements, and then scenario 3, impact of both together, because then that gives you the granularity to see what's actually making the difference in each of these scenarios, in each of these situations. I would assume that's not going to be kind of part of this because of that combined piece. And so how do we kind of think through that as we try to better understand the kind of the outcome of the EA? And then to make it just a little bit more confusing, the regional pricing program is going to be implemented by before the 2027 period. So even our first modeling that we do, I'm assuming this doesn't take into account any impact of regional modeling as part of these outcomes. So how do we create a valid model for the EA that doesn't include such an incredibly different structure for transportation in the area? Does that all make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will kind of pick that apart a little bit. So you summarized it very well. Without tolling, there's no capital project. And without the capital project, we wouldn't have this sort of tolling that we were proposing at these 2 bridges. So they're modeled together because there is one project. We've heard that direction from the legislature, and it was, regionally supported and approved as we amended the regional transportation plan last year. And so the project is now in the regional transportation plan as a toll project, as we do the improvements on 205. And we rely on a Metro to do our modeling and the regional transportation plan, the travel demand model, for all of the work that we have been presenting to you. And so anything that's in the regional transportation plan, we include in our analysis, again, in the future, looking at the project without the project. And so it doesn't make sense to move forward with that sort of analysis, given that those realities are not possible moving forward in the future. So we have demonstrated what we would plan to implement and construct, and that's what we share through the environmental assessment. As we move forward with, and again, we want to fully capture the potential impacts and benefits. As we move forward with the regional transportation plan update, which is Metro has underway right now, we will be adding the regional mobility pricing project into that model and that plan. And so the analysis that happens for the regional mobility pricing project would assume that there's tolling already in place on 205, as well as tolling on the northern part of I-5 at the interstate bridge, right? So that those projects are already in the model. And then the model keeps getting updated as that regional transportation plan is updated. So there'll be a lot of coordination there. And then there'll be a similar environmental process that we've just started for the regional project. So these conversations will occur, you know, again, once there's analysis available for that project.
Sure. I mean, I think that makes sense. Now, the concern, of course, you know, as I think we've expressed before, is having the time delay between the two projects. There is the potential, again, you know, as a layperson, that the first project is able to pass through based on the EA essentially ignoring the fact that this other one's coming, and then the second one is already impacted by the first one, where the potential for the second to not happen or be delayed becomes greater because of that impact from the initial one. So that's just where the concern kind of lies in my mind, which would be why you would want to look at them both together. But okay,
the second one will include all the analysis, so that'll have that comprehensive analysis included.
Right, but after the first one's been implemented, so which then would potentially jeopardize the second one if it's determined that the first one plus the second was too great for the system. So that's the concern. But or I mean, if I'm not thinking through that correctly, please, you know, I don't know what I don't know, so I'm just speculating.
Well, I mean, as I mentioned, the regional mobility pricing project, and I don't want to get too far afield because I want to make sure all the questions about the 205 analysis get answered, but the regional mobility pricing project analysis will be built around the understanding of the other toll projects that already will be here. So give us a couple months and you'll be able to review the findings for that one.
Oh, okay, so time wise, there will be overlap in the near term to look at both of them concurrently. So, but that'll be after the initial comment period is closed for the first one, right? So we're kind of moving on to the second. I'll stop that train of thought. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, I just have one overarching question, and then I'll save the rest for when we get into the comment on the scoping letter, and also allow them to complete the rest of their presentation. So just in a general sense, when I was reading through the draft EA, it really stood out to me the part of the narrative, like the historical narrative that was presented, and basically just talking about how ODOT was granted the categorical exclusion because it was determined that it wouldn't involve the significant environmental impacts. But from my understanding, that categorical exclusion was granted before it was disclosed that tolling would be a part of this project. And so I'm just not understanding why the EA process was even allowed to move forward and why it wouldn't have been an EIS. So if you could explain that, that would be great.
Sure. I was not involved with the project when FHWA and ODOT moved forward with the categorical exclusion determination for the 205 improvements project. And that categorical exclusion, I think, was signed in, I don't know, maybe 2018, the end of 2018. And so I can't speak to how that decision was made. We did a reevaluation of that categorical exclusion last year and adjusted that categorical exclusion to apply to the portion of the 205 project that's currently under construction, the Abernathy Bridge and the adjacent interchanges, that sound wall in Oregon City. And then we are doing now the environmental assessment on the other aspects of the project, as well as the tolling piece. So that was in terms of the NEPA process, those are the requirements and the analysis that was done at each stage. And so now we are moving forward with the environmental review of the capital improvements and the variable rate tolling.
And is that's going to be an EIS?
That's our current environmental assessment.
All right, so let's keep moving forward with the presentation so we can have a good conversation afterward about the scoping letter. Mr. Wilson.
Sorry, I'm noting that there was another question in the chat that may not have gotten covered. It was from Mr. McCabe on the Hamlet side. What changes on diversion programs will occur as delays on Borland Road are showing more than 10 minutes slower than 2015? I think that was your base year. The speeds on Borland have already decreased by 7 minutes since 2008. So total will be seeing a 20-minute delay once tolling is introduced. How is that addressed?
I think this is a similar comment to the earlier comments about existing conditions. And we are, with this one project, not able to address every challenge that exists in the area. So we are working on a project to improve seismic resiliency and safety, reduce crashes, and improve mobility, reduce congestion on I-205, and to do that in a way that minimizes and reduces and mitigates any impacts to the local system. So we are not doing analysis that compares the future to today. We are doing analysis that compares the future to the future. And as Councilor Sherman so clearly articulated, kind of what that impact the project causes would be.
All right, if you could continue on with your presentation.
Okay, great. I think I only have one or two slides at the end. I think we can go to the next slide. Adela, is there a slide after this? Okay. So I just wanted to share that we do have a lot of tools available online. We have a series of videos. We have a kind of an executive summary, multi-page fact sheet. We have an online comment form. We also are taking comments by email or phone. We will have an online public hearing. We also will have an option for folks that maybe don't have access to phone or computer technology to provide their comments directly in person to a court reporter. So we're trying to provide many tools so that people can understand the information that's available and also provide their input on the environmental assessment and the analysis within it. The materials are translated, and we are having also public webinars. So we had the first one yesterday. We have another one tomorrow. And comments are welcome until April 21st, when we will close the comment period. So happy to also take comments or questions as I'm going through here. All the comments will be reviewed, and ODOT and FHWA will respond to comments and comment themes and the revised document. And then FHWA will issue their decision on the analysis, which would either be a finding of no significant impact, or there would be perhaps a requirement for additional analysis. So once we know how many comments we have, we'll be able to have a more clear timeline for kind of the summary that we'll produce to share those comments out.
Thank you. Just real quick, what was the attendance like at your online webinar the other day?
We streamed it live, and I don't know how many people were watching by YouTube. I think we had about 20 attendees that attended in real time via the Zoom link. We also did have ASL interpretation and 2 other language rooms available for interpretation.
Good, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions following that presentation before we start talking about the letter? And Commissioner Savas, good to see you. Councilor Sherman.
Yeah, so I guess the question about the comments are all comments submitted, reviewed by both ODOT and FHWA, or is it is there kind of is the throughput complete, or is there kind of a filtering and a coalescing information first? In other words, if you get a lot of comments that are not really kind of specific to the project, do they still get passed through How do you avoid getting just a lot of noise as part of the comment process?
I mean, anything that comes in that talks about the 205 project, we'll consider as a comment right now on the environmental assessment. So we'd err on the side of over inclusion. I will say we have, ODOT is responsible for collecting all those comments, but I have been getting forwarded comments from FHWA or from, other people at ODOT. If comments, make it, eventually, hopefully they will all make it to us, but we really are encouraging people to use the avenues that we have established here. So it's clear and we can track everything, but yeah,
okay.
There'll be review and discussion with FHWA on all the comments. We won't pick and choose those.
Very good. Will we see some summary of that information after the fact? Okay.
Yeah, I was saying once we know how many comments come in, I'll be able to let you know how long it'll take us to produce that summary.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Given that conversation, I think it would be good to move into the C4 scoping letter discussion. Mr. Wilson, if you'll kick us off. And as you have read in your packet, the comment deadline has been extended by an additional 15 days. That doesn't affect us, that doesn't benefit us. And I know for many of us, even for us as elected officials, we're having a hard time getting through this document in the allotted time. So thinking about what the public would be able to do is kind of difficult to see how that might help that much. But given those constraints right now, I'll hand it over to Mr. Wilson and he can kick off this topic for us.
Thank you very much. And I've brought in my colleague, Jamie Stasny, as well as helping us and therefore helping you on the general comment work that's happening at the county in 4C4. I will say ODOT, really appreciate y'all's presentation and going through what changed in those mitigation pieces. I'm going to move y'all over to the audience just so that the group can sort of speak more specifically. Y'all don't have to stay, and of course the meeting's recorded, so everything's public. But thanks for coming, and we'll move into this discussion process here forward. So yes, we're going to, from your comments today, we're going to start crafting the C4 letter, which will be at your next C4 meeting. I think that's April 6th. And so as you mentioned, the comment period was extended slightly, but that does not extend it into your next C4 meeting. Which would be the May meeting. So you really are, unless the extension happens further, this next C4 meeting is the time for you to comment. Little technical C4 nuances, but there has been some examples in the past where maybe the C4 committee doesn't quite land the plane and needs more time and delegates like the next subcommittee that's meeting to finalize a letter. If that needed to happen, that would still fall within your next meeting before the current comment window is due. But my recommendation is that y'all use this time now to talk about the list that we were able to provide to you in the packet. It's the last 2 pages of the packet. What we provided was a very high level language within that about things, topics, themes that you have already talked about in the past, have brought up in some of these conversations here. They're not really nuanced yet. We are hoping that y'all could spend some of the remaining time here. Y'all got like 35 minutes left on our calendar to dive into the weeds that you want to dive into, provide those comments that you really, I guess my questions are, what's missing or what needs to be added to the list that's provided to you? And of the things that are there, or the things that you add, what do you want to really point out within those pieces? And I guess my reminder to you in that conversation would be that ODOT is looking for this, and they've said it multiple times, that the EA is a technical document more than a policy document. And certainly I think different folks have feelings about that phrase. But as we're thinking about comments, we're going to try to bend this as much as we can towards the technical side on behalf of C4, even though you are generically a policy body. So this is open time. Is this the right list? And what do you want to say about what's on the list?
Thanks, Trent. So does anyone have any comments? Councilor Sherman?
Sure, thank you. I think that the list is a really good starting point, and it's each of the bullets are potentially a letter unto themselves. There's so much information and so much potential depth that I'm, just a little concerned how long this could be. And that's kind of why I was asking the question about the comment period, and are all comments going to be reviewed by both ODOT and FHWA, or does ODOT kind of pick and choose what gets passed through? And the reason I asked that question is because I think there are a lot of really key points that are not being addressed by the EA, by the structure of it. So that whole notion that, without the tolling, there's no capital project, which is not a true statement. It is a completely factually inaccurate statement. The choice is being made to include those together, but that's not, otherwise, why aren't we tolling 217 for the improvements happening there? We make a judgment call as to where we apply resources and we utilize them. So, the EA doesn't necessarily measure the things that we need to know. That is it the tolling that's improving things, or is it the improvements to the third lane on the road that's improving things? So that's kind of a concept that I think is potentially important to have as part of our comments. Whether that's part of this comment letter or not, I'm not sure. And same thing with the impact of RMPP to the system versus just this. And I tried to kind of elaborate that, but I know that it's a broad concept. But the notion that you would analyze just 205 tolling with essentially the assumption that RMPP is not happening. It's completely excluded from this analysis. So you can easily take a look at it and say 2045, there are no impacts to these intersections. And then in theory, the next analysis is going to be RMPP on top of that, which theoretically could show a whole lot of impacts, which then puts that maybe in jeopardy, or it moves it out time-wise. And that was part of our concerns initially of having them be two separate projects and so far apart. And I don't know if that's a comment specific. I guess it's a comment about the EA, but I don't know, how does a comment like that get interpreted? The notion that you should be measuring the impact of tolling, the impact of the improvements, and then the impact of them combined to get a better feel for the details as to what actually is happening in that situation. I understand that is an ask that is so huge relative to the analysis that needs to be done, that I kind of feel like it would be like, thanks for the comment and we appreciate it. So other than that, I think what we've kind of aligned so far on a lot of our comments so far are a very good starting point for the conversation. So that's what I've got today. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. McCabe.
Okay, my question is on the EA, and it would be the question probably also the city of West Lynn, that there's a certain amount in the EA of how many cars will exit northbound at and enter southbound on I-205 from the West Lynn area. And I know it's in the thousands, if not tens of thousands. Is in the environmental assessment, it's assuming that many of these people will still use that traffic pattern. And that's just an assumption. I think we also should go with the assumption of nobody will take the 10th Street exit, because it's only 3 miles from Stafford to there in order to avoid the tolling. And if that's put in, there is nothing done to help this mitigation problem that's being addressed anywhere. And this is pretty detrimental to the whole community.
Thank you, Councilor Baumgartner.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I just wanted to second everything that Councilor Sherman said, and also say, I don't think we have enough time in this period. I'll just reiterate that again. I know that's been said before, for such a humongous sea change in our system and the way it operates. Thank you.
Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, thank you all. I apologize for not being at the beginning of the meeting, but sometimes our meetings get scheduled in the overlap, and voila, I'm here now. I appreciate Councilor Sherman's thoughts. He and I have spoken recently about some of the points he's made here today as well. I'll make one comment and I have a suggestion. The comment I have is that this EA is essentially in about the tail end of 2024 will be pretty well worthless. All the data will be worthless, because if the RMPP does begin at the end of 2024, then really that overlay of that toll is going to change the numbers. And not only is it going to change the numbers, but it's still obscure because of the fact that they have conflated the two studies together. You know, had they separated, we made this comment before, had they separated and done a study on simply the widening improvements, and then done the study of the traffic flow improvements as a result of tolling afterwards, and then we'd be able to parse out the significant impacts that actually the tolling is actually creating. So getting back to the RMPP, you know, that analysis, even though it will be later, will supersede this. So I find it difficult to say that they're speculating out the 2027 and 2045. That's all worthless data when you take into account that the RMPP is going to follow this. So my suggestion, in the interest of time, I'm going to open up the report here. Where'd it go? And yeah, getting back to the very back page of the packet, and what is poised right there as topics or questions, and they're framed as questions. I think some of those, the fact that they haven't been adequately addressed, I think we can make statements out of those by changing the wording to say, for example, where you know, you could pick whichever one you want here. Economic impacts, you know. Our jurisdictions will be affected with delivery of goods and so forth, and there's been no in-depth analysis. I think we can turn some of these questions into statements that, or concerns that they have not been addressed. These questions haven't been addressed, and therefore we can only conclude XXX. So there is, as Councilor Baumgartner said, there's not enough time to do the work here, but I'm wondering if there's a willingness for some of us to meet offline and frame up some of these things and the concerns and work together on that. Whether we do it in person or virtual is a choice, but I am committed to doing whatever I can to helping this along. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Trent.
Well, I was just going to say on that point, you know, we have 2 weeks from tomorrow until the C4 packet would be published, and that gives staff about a week to you know, put together a draft letter, and maybe on that Monday before the packet we could shop it with, as Commissioner Savas said, like a select few. I think too many folks could get a little unwieldy, but just folks who are like, I mean, this is a pretty small group, so maybe this is the right group. But kind of see what I'm saying, like not the whole C4 group, but just kind of like a preset group of eyes to make sure that the letter's going in the right direction before it gets that C4 packet. I think that's going to make the most of your time at the C4 meeting as well, honestly, because there will be folks in there who you can give us some of that early direction. And so that if there's any fringe additions, it would be folks who haven't had the chance to see it. So could be good or positive, you know, additions as well. But for the most part, it would be things that are tightening the language or maybe missing any pieces that the diversion subcommittee hasn't discussed yet, since Shell's work has mostly been around the diversionary aspects of the project. So we can do that by email, though, is maybe my recommendation. I know everybody's pretty busy.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if that's something we could be doing via email, and if there's general agreement there, I'm seeing some head nods. I would appreciate going down that avenue so that we, even though we may not have a meeting, and definitely not our regularly scheduled meeting, that we would have an opportunity to at least give some comments on that. So let's go ahead and move forward down that path. And I'll try and keep my comments short. I think they can be distilled really into two areas that I'd like to see emphasized. The first is that going through the economic impacts section and through that appendix, I really just wish that there was more of a micro study of how it would actually affect our local economies, rather than just saying this is going to create a bunch of construction jobs, which is obviously going to be happening because someone has to be doing the construction for the improvements. And so something that I would like to see, at least after my first time going through these appendices, is seeing more of a focus on how this will actually affect, for example, Willamette Falls Drive, how it's going to affect Main Street in Oregon City, how it's going to affect the businesses along 99 in Canby. Because I don't think there was enough of an emphasis there. And that was my understanding, that it was going to be more focused on our local economies rather than just the macro. This is going to create jobs by virtue of us creating a public investment here for these improvements. So that's the number one thing that I'd like to see. And then the other thing I think can really just be distilled into the comment that I don't think that the cities and ODOT have a similar definition of the word mitigation. I still really struggle. For me in Oregon City, my number one intersection that I'm concerned about is the 7th and Main, which is the Arch Bridge and Main Street. And I understand that we're limited geographically by what we're able to put in terms of mitigation there. But to say that we'll put some pedestrian improvements here, that's not going to help the issue that we all know is going to be coming. And then when we look at other areas that were already parts of our TSPs, where we're already looking at those improvements, or where some of these safety improvements seem to be just deferred maintenance that should have been dealt with a long time ago, regardless of the tolling. It just doesn't seem like the mitigations that are being proposed actually address the situation and more address the issues that are currently there, and trying to wrap it up with a bow and saying, here's what we'll give to you. So that's my general distilled comment, is that we do not have the same definition of what mitigation is. So I'll leave it at that for now. Commissioner Savas, did you have another comment, or is that an old hand?
I mistakenly just I tried to send a chat to all of you just to echo what you just said, Councilor or Commissioner, and that is most, if not all, the mitigations are not solutions.
Absolutely. Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thanks. And apologize for my tardiness. I did get notes from the beginning of the meeting from Ramona, which I missed. But I just wanted to echo, Commissioner, your note on the difference in opinion on what a true mitigation is. I also think that there's still confusion around intent around this as a final product versus what is the floor, what is the base level, what is required by the federal government, and if there is any will to do anything else. We've not been given any other guidance, so this is what we have to work with. Now is the time, if ODOT doesn't want us taking this as the product, to give us more. And if we don't have an extension on top of the additional 15 days, I don't think we can react to anything else. So if these are the mitigations that are offered and drafted, these are the mitigations that we are assuming we are operating from. So I do think it is appropriate for us to move forward, spelling out what additional mitigations are absolutely necessary, and also the shortfalls based on what we know from our local communities.
Thank you, Councilor Lewis. Councilor Sherman.
Yeah, my apologies to the group. So I'm only about 50 pages into the document, but if anyone has read through more of it, one of the questions I have that I haven't been able to answer yet is, so does the EA actually identify like some of the failing facilities and kind of the mitigations, but then does it give you the stats as to here's how it fails and here's what the mitigation does to address that? And so my point being, like the crosswalk, I think it's 12th Street in West Lynn. Okay, it's a safety issue. That's cool. And I'm not downplaying the importance of that. but I want to know, like, okay, so what occurred to get to that point? Why was that identified? And then how does the fix actually do something for it? And I want to know that for every intersection that's impacted, or every facility that's impacted by this project, because without that information, I'm just operating on, good on faith, that what's being presented is an accurate representation of what's going to happen, and then the mitigations that are proposed are appropriate and are going to have a meaningful impact on those potential circumstances. So I guess that's kind of the one question I have. And then I guess the other thing I'm trying to wrap my head around is that the comment was made today. I don't remember which presenter, but it was like they were talking about the intersections in Tualatin, and the comment was made that some of the changes from the prior information to the current was they pulled back on it because they weren't getting good bang for the buck in the mitigation that they were putting in place, and that they were geographically constrained in what they could do. Okay, but then does that mean that the thing that they identified in the first place just doesn't get addressed because it's not costly, and or you can't fix it? And then how again does that apply to the rest of the system? Or was it just not a big enough deal where they kind of said we were going to do it because we were really nice and being proactive, but we're going to deploy resources somewhere else? Does that make sense? Because I'm just when you apply subjective comments on top of objective information that it's going to get worse, I don't understand then what does that mean for each of these situations where we've identified a problem, and again kind of back to that, quantify the solution for me so I understand what's happening. So that's my comment. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. And a lot of these comments are getting back to the question I had asked earlier about the intention of doing an EA versus an EIS. I think a lot of the details that we feel like we're missing are in part due to the fact that this is not as in-depth as an EIS would have been, even though it doesn't make sense that there would have been a categorical exclusion, which I'm still a little confused about. So I'll be sure to follow up on that. But anyway, Mr. McCabe.
Yes. Is there any rule or regulation about us sending our comments in at the same time to FHWA? Because if they know what's coming from us, because once all the comments are in, ODOT is going to meet with them to come up with some other different report. But are we allowed to send our comments also to FHWA to basically say these are our concerns that we feel are not being addressed, and we feel it could get totally missed in the EA? Is that the way to go or not?
Just on a technical side, nothing precludes us from CCing FHWA at the bottom of your C4 letter or any letter from any jurisdiction. I think what I heard Mandy say was that ODOT's required to do this in partnership with FHWA anyway, and so they'll go through each of these and determine which, as Councilor Sherman was saying, which of these are appropriate or not. And then of course there's a local district for FHWA, and so it's not going to go to the big federal office. It's going to go to this local FHWA office, and that's going to be the project team that helps them navigate some of this. So it'll happen anyway, I think, is the short answer. But it's not like Uncle Sam is going to be providing full oversight from the halls of DC. I want to set expectations.
Well, there is an office here in Oregon that you can mail to, and that's what I was referring to. Is do we mail to the office in Oregon?
Yeah, if we're going to CC them, we would do that.
Yeah, and that was my understanding, that those comments would be reviewed in tandem with ODOT and FHWA based off of the presentation today. But yeah, it would be good for us to double check on that. Jamie.
Thank you, Councilor Marl. I just wanted to jump in really quickly to respond to Councilor Sherman's question regarding the mitigation piece. So my understanding is, for ODOT to receive the FONSI, the finding of no significant impact, they have to show that they can reduce any significant impacts below that level of significance. That doesn't necessarily look like here's the impact and here's the solution that completely fixes that impact and mitigates it. That's not what that means. It means reducing it below that level of significance. So I want to give an example, which is the way that they've determined whether there is a significant impact at an intersection is the V over C, right? That's one of the ways of looking at that change. Now, some of the mitigations they're offering, for example, if there's a four-way stop, maybe the problem's coming from the north to the south, but that has constraints, so they can't fix it. So maybe they do something to fix it at the south end. Even though that's not actually fixing the problem, it's increasing the mobility and decreasing the V over C at the intersection. So that counts as a mitigation, even though it's not addressing the problem itself. So I think that's some of what is going on here. Is the definition and how they've described those mitigations and the difference they make at the intersection as a whole versus the difference they're making at the point at which the impact is occurring. So just pointing out, I know that's nuanced, but I also wanted to point out there's been a lot of mentions of time and that we don't have enough of it. Staff from Clackamas County 100% agrees with that. Our board yesterday had issued a second letter requesting a 90-day comment period. They're still asking for 30 more days. That would give you all an opportunity to have another C4 meeting and would buy some of the time to do a more in-depth analysis and more coordination between the county and cities and our regional partners on this. So just want to mention that as well.
Thank you. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, just to building on what Jamie just mentioned, responding to Councilor Sherman's question. Yeah, as I read it, I'm not an expert, obviously, so just put that out there in front. But as I read it, that they weren't thoroughly the mitigation projects weren't thoroughly studied in a way that would say, oh, it actually is a solution or it's not, right? So it's quite vague, and it really doesn't accomplish that. I'm going to give you an example of a concern I have with traffic circles, because some of that is some of the design in this project is traffic circles. I don't know how many of you have experience of going through the traffic circle at Stafford Borland, for example, but I've seen that fail. What's unique about a traffic circle over a traffic light, some of the outcomes of those failures would not happen at a signalized intersection versus a traffic circle. I have been in the traffic circle stuck because the traffic backed up on the on-ramp going northbound, the I-205, with people going all the way up from the freeway on the overpass, from that on-ramp, all the way back to the circle, and jammed and made that complete intersection, complete traffic circle, and the other streets come to a gridlock. So it caused a complete failure, whereas a signalized intersection, it would have only limited to maybe 2 of the 4 streets being affected there, or the ins and outs of the traffic circle. That's probably not technical language, but I just have a concern that as they're factoring all these things in there, to Councilor Sherman's point, I don't think they've been studied enough, and that's why, again, the EIS is something that we ought to be advocating for. And I think the EIS ought to be, I think we got to be honest here, I think the EIS ought to be in concert with the full RMPP impacts as well. It would be dishonest to simply ask for an EIS only on this aspect when we recognize it's just a point in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Savas. Are there any other preliminary comments on how we would like to see this this letter go about? I'm looking forward to seeing a draft via email. I think that would be a good way for us to get in some comments, just given the time constraints, but hopefully we will have the opportunity to maybe have another meeting if that additional extension is given. So Mr. Wilson, is that enough fodder for you to begin working on this?
Absolutely. And I'll just say, like, if we find out that a bigger extension is granted that goes into your next C4 meeting, I think that we could just punt that draft review into the C4 meeting itself and save everybody a little bit of time. So hopefully that determination is made in the next week or so, if they're going to make it. But if not, we'll continue as planned. We'll do our best to get a draft together with your comments today and some of the comments y'all made in the past, as well as some of the findings that we're having here at the county and with some of your colleagues who are monitoring it over in the attendee group who are helping us as well. So I just want to maybe encourage y'all that it really is a family dinner table when we're all talking about this at the staff level. All the cities in the county are working together. It's so tight knit right now. If there's any misconception out there that something's not happening, I hope that you and your team can maybe dispel some of that rumor that there is a lot of staff time and work going into this to make sure that even with this constrained timeline, there will be an adequate response that's representative of the concerns of all of our jurisdictions. So the C4 will be part of that, but so can each of your individual letters as well from your jurisdiction. I think we can all benefit from one another, but it's been a really terrible reason to come together, but it's been a really cool thing to see out, just the way all the jurisdictions have been able to tighten up and work together, and this sort of like massive PhD level group exercise that we're all doing.
Agreed. Second that to all of our staff and county staff, many of whom are on the attendee list right now and are on the late night C4 meetings, and in addition to all of our additional meetings on top of that's a huge deal. And so we would not be able to do this without their actual expertise in this subject. So thank you, Jamie and Trent. And are there any other comments or questions for the good of the order? All right, seeing none, we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you.